Amir came from a poor village in Uttar Pradesh, India. He grew up in poverty, always dreaming of a better life. When he heard about job opportunities in Delhi, he didn't hesitate, selling off the last of his valuable belongings to find his way to the city, hoping to make a lot of money. But reality was harsher than Amir expected. Without a degree or connections, he was just another nameless face in the sea of struggling people in Delhi. Pushed to the edge, he began seeking other ways to get rich, ways that didn't require hard work. One day, while wandering through a rundown neighborhood, Amir met Simran. This beautiful girl worked as a waitress in a small restaurant. She was abused by the owner and harassed by rich customers every day, unable to do anything about it. Her eyes were empty, filled with despair, like a caged bird that couldn't escape. Amir quickly saw an opportunity. He approached Simran with sweet words, painting a bright future, promising that he would rescue her from her miserable fate. Simran, weak and lonely, believed his promises and agreed to marry him. They married quietly, and Simran was happy, thinking that her life would finally change. But she had no idea that the real tragedy had only just begun. Just a few weeks into their marriage, Simran realized that the life she had imagined was nothing like what Amir had promised. The sweet words, the vows he made to her, had all turned out to be lies. Amir was no longer the gentle husband she had thought he was. His true face had slowly emerged. At first, Amir started complaining about their financial struggles. He lamented that money was getting tighter, that his job couldn't support both of them, and that they might soon end up living on the streets unless they figured out a way to make more money. Simran felt heartbroken. She knew they were poor, but she still believed they could make it through together. But Amir had a different plan. One evening, he came to her with a tense expression, then gently said, "I have a friend. He can help us. He's wealthy and ready to give us a large sum of money if you agree to have dinner with him. Just a dinner, nothing more." Simran shuddered. A wave of unease swept over her. "No, Amir." She immediately shook her head. "I can't do that." But Amir didn't give up. Day by day, he continued to convince her, planting seeds of pressure in her mind. "Do you know how much I'm suffering? I work all day, but we still can't afford food. We can't keep living like this. Just endure a little longer, and we'll have a better life." His sweet words slowly turned into harsher reproaches. "If you really love me, you'll do this for us," he whispered in her ear one night, his voice heavy with implied threats. Simran still refused, but his words clung to her mind, like poisonous snakes creeping into every corner of her thoughts. Until one day, when there was no rice left in the house, when Amir slammed his fist on the table and shouted that he couldn't stand living in poverty anymore. Simran began to waver. She didn't want to do it, but did she have any other choice? The next day, Amir told her to dress nicely. He said they would go to a fancy restaurant to meet his friend. Simran remained silent the whole way, the unease growing stronger with each passing minute. When they stopped in front of a luxurious apartment instead of the restaurant he had mentioned, she turned to Amir, her worry palpable. "Where are we going?" she asked. Amir only smiled, a forced smile. "Don't worry, it's just a private meeting. We need to make him feel comfortable, okay?" Simran's body froze. When the door of the apartment closed behind her, she realized she had walked into a trap. The man didn't just want to have dinner with her. Simran fought back, screamed, but no one heard her. That night when she stumbled back home, her body was bruised, her clothes torn, her eyes empty. She trembled so much she could barely walk. Amir didn't comfort her, didn't ask if she was okay. He silently handed her a stack of money. "We need to survive," he said, his tone calm as if nothing had happened. "Just endure a little longer." Simran stared at the money in her hands. It was cold, emotionless. Was this what she was worth in Amir's eyes? But a little longer never ended. The next night, and the next, Amir continued to sell her to different men. She no longer needed convincing because he knew she had lost all will to resist. Every time she was sent away, Simran knew exactly what would happen. She knew there would be another strange man, rough hands, the mocking laughs as she screamed in pain. But the worst part wasn't what they did to her. The worst part was that when she came home, Amir still looked at her as if nothing had happened. When she cried, begged him to stop, he just smiled smugly. "You think we have any other choice?" Then he would walk away, leaving her alone in the dark room, curled up like a hunted animal. Days passed and Simran grew weaker. She no longer cried. She no longer begged. Her eyes became hollow, as if her soul had been drained. She had lost everything. She had lost her freedom. She had lost her dream of true love. She had lost herself. After months of being exploited, Simran was completely drained. She had lost all faith in love and life. But one day, a terrifying truth hit her. That day, Simran was left alone at home. While cleaning up, she happened to find an old phone of Amir's hidden under the bed. Out of curiosity, she opened it, and what she saw nearly stopped her heart. On the phone were hundreds of messages between Amir and strange men. Transactions where he sold her, recordings of her screaming and begging him to stop, and even conversations where Amir laughed with his clients, casually discussing her price as if she were nothing more than a commodity. Simran was stunned. She had always thought Amir was exploiting her out of desperation, that he had no other choice. But now she realized he had never loved her. From the very beginning, she had been nothing but a tool in his scheme to make money. The pain in her heart ignited into a raging fire of hatred, and from that moment, she decided she would never cry or beg again. She would take revenge. Simran began crafting a meticulous plan. She knew that if she killed Amir directly, she would never escape the consequences. But if she made him suffer the way he had made her suffer, that would be the perfect revenge. One night, Simran pretended to accept her fate. She obeyed Amir without resistance. He believed she had finally submitted. But in reality, Simran had secretly prepared something special, a colorless, odorless poison, undetectable by modern medicine. It was a slow-acting toxin that caused heart failure over time, making the victim appear to die of natural causes. Every night when Amir sent clients to her, Simran would discreetly inject them with a small dose of the poison, just enough that they wouldn't notice anything unusual. They would leave her seemingly unharmed, but hours later, they would mysteriously die, and no one would be able to determine the cause. Within just 1 week, 3 men had died shortly after leaving Amir's house. News of the strange deaths began to spread. Amir started to panic. The mysterious deaths of his clients left him sleepless with fear. Rumors spread throughout the neighborhood about a strange curse following him, but he refused to believe in superstitions until he felt death creeping closer to him. One night, after sending another client to Simran, Amir quietly slipped away from the house. But this time, he didn't go far. He hid in a dark corner, peering through a small gap in the window, determined to uncover the truth. What he saw sent a chill down his spine. Simran didn't struggle or cry as she once did. She remained calm, waiting for the perfect moment. When the man was distracted, she subtly reached under her pillow, pulling out a small syringe. In a swift, practiced motion, she pressed it into his thigh and quickly withdrew it as if nothing had happened. Amir's eyes widened in shock. His entire body trembled. It was her. He stumbled backward into the shadows, his heart pounding violently in his chest. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. The weak, helpless girl he had treated like a puppet was now silently killing every man who touched her. The next morning, the man was found dead on his way home. Cause of death, sudden cardiac arrest. Amir knew he was the next one. He began to fear his own house. He no longer dared to touch Simran. He could no longer look her in the eye. And then the obsession became a reality. 3 days later, as Amir sat alone in the dark room, Simran walked in, holding a cup of hot tea. "You seem tired," she said, her voice gentle. Amir stared at her, cold sweat dripping down the back of his neck. What did you do to them?" he whispered, his voice dry. Simran smiled, a mysterious, deathly smile. She placed the cup of tea in front of him and sat down across from him. "Do you remember the first day we met?" she asked. "When you said you would save me from hell?" Amir didn't answer. He swallowed hard, his hand clenching tightly. "Funny," Simran continued, her voice still calm. "You're the one who pushed me into hell, Amir. And you think I wouldn't resist?" Amir's heart pounded so hard that he thought it might explode. You wouldn't dare," he tried to say, but his voice trembled. Simran tilted her head, her eyes gleaming like a predator, ready to pounce on its prey. "Do you know?" she whispered. "The poison I used on them cannot be detected. No doctor can figure out the real cause. It just looks like a natural heart attack. Subtle. No one suspects anything. But I don't want you to go so easily." Amir opened his mouth as if to say something, but he had no strength left. A sharp pain spread through his chest. And then he realized. When had he been injected? "This is the poison I've used on you. You won't die immediately. It will torture you, bit by bit." Simran laughed softly, but her smile contained the cruelty of 1,000 storms. "This is what you gave me. The pain, the sleepless nights, the times I had to endure in silence. Now you'll be the one to experience it." The pain shot through him like a vice squeezing his heart. His eyes bulged, his breath coming in short gasps. He tried to stand, but his legs were numb. He couldn't scream for help. Simran just sat there watching him, her eyes cold like a vengeful goddess. Day by day, Amir grew weaker. The pain never stopped, each stab feeling like a knife piercing his body. He couldn't eat, he couldn't sleep. Only the sounds of his screams echoed in the dead of night, but no one could hear them. Simran came every day, wordlessly. She only watched him, her eyes devoid of emotion. He knew he was dying, but her cruelty terrified him more than death itself. Then one day when Amir was on the brink of death, Simran entered the room with a glass of water. She said nothing, only looked at him one last time before placing the cup on the table. "Do you want to die, Amir?" she asked, her voice as cold as ice. Amir tried to open his mouth, but only a weak sigh escaped. He knew there was no escape. Death had come, but the price he had to pay was too steep. Simran walked out, and at that moment, Amir felt his life slowly slipping away. One night, there were no more breaths, no more sounds of him gasping for air. The news of Amir's death spread throughout the neighborhood, but no one could truly understand the cause. All they knew was that he had died mysteriously, with no signs of external injury or clear wounds. Doctors couldn't explain the cause of his death. Simran didn't stay long. She left silently without a word, leaving no trace behind. He had paid the price for every sin he had committed, and now Simran continued her life, a soul freed from the cruelty Amir had inflicted. When Simran left the house where she had once been imprisoned, the shadows of her past still loomed over her. She didn't know where she would go, had no one to rely on. But one thing she knew for certain, she had survived. Every step she took on this new path reminded her of what she had endured. The wounds on her body might heal, but the scars in her soul would not fade so easily. She had lost so much: her trust, her love, the innocence of a girl who once believed in promises. But now she was no longer the weak Simran she once was. She had reclaimed her freedom, and she vowed never to let anyone take it from her again. Simran wandered through different cities, taking on any job she could find just to survive. Sometimes she worked as a server in a small tea shop, other times as a cleaner in a shabby hotel. She accepted anything, as long as it didn't put her back on the path where she had once been treated like an object. Every night, as she sat alone in a cramped rented room, she wondered if she could ever truly forget what had happened. But every time she thought of Amir, the man who had sold her over and over, who had turned her into nothing more than a tool for his profit, she reminded herself that she couldn't break down. She hadn't survived just to exist. She had survived to start over. Slowly, Simran found a better job at a small tailoring shop. She had a natural talent for sewing, and the shop owner, an elderly woman, sensed the pain in her eyes but never asked any questions. She simply taught Simran new techniques and gave her an opportunity to create something beautiful with her hands. Simran began to love this work. Every stitch, every seam felt like a step toward mending the broken pieces of herself. But Simran knew that out there, many other girls were still trapped, deceived, sold, treated as mere commodities with no one to protect them. She had escaped, but what about them? One day on her way home from work, Simran overheard a young girl crying on the side of the road. A man stood nearby, angrily scolding her, telling her to obey if she didn't want to starve. Simran recognized that look, the look she once had. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and pulled the girl away from the man. "Come with me," she said firmly. The girl hesitated, then looked into Simran's eyes that held no pity, only understanding. Without a second thought, she followed Simran. From that moment on, Simran knew her new purpose. She couldn't go back in time to save herself, but she could help other girls escape the fate she had suffered. Simran started learning about organizations that protected women, shelters that helped survivors of human trafficking. She went into poor neighborhoods, the places where young girls were most vulnerable, and warned them. She helped them escape. She taught them how to be independent. She gave them the chance she had once wished for. Over time, Simran was no longer just a survivor. She became the one that desperate women sought when they had no one else to turn to. One day, while walking through the city, Simran heard a piece of news. A man had been arrested for trafficking women. When his face appeared on the television screen, Simran felt her heart pound. It was one of the men who had once bought her from Amir. He had finally been caught. But what about Amir? She didn't know if anyone ever suspected him, but it no longer mattered. He was dead, and more importantly, he had died in fear, in agony, just as he had made her suffer. Simran no longer needed revenge, she had spent so long hating, resenting. But now she realized that true victory wasn't making her enemy suffer. It was being able to live without him haunting her anymore. Years later, Simran opened a small tailoring shop. But it wasn't just a clothing store. It was a place where young women, who had once been victims like her, could come to learn a skill to rebuild their lives. Customers sometimes wondered why the shop's owner, a woman with sharp but kind eyes, always treated the young girls working there like family. They didn't know that she had once been one of them. They didn't know that Simran had walked out of the darkness, carrying both pain and hatred. But instead of letting it consume her, she had turned it into strength. Simran was no longer a victim. She was a survivor, and more than that, she was a protector.